Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you all in cyberspace. Greetings from semi-sunny Seattle, where I am right now. I'm Amy Eva, the Associate Education Director at the Greater Good Science Center, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you all soon in person. This webinar on mindfulness is the second in our three-part series. You might want to grab a cool or warm drink, whatever you prefer, have it near you, get comfortable, and we will jump right in to a few minutes of mindfulness. So here are our goals for this brief webinar. I want to talk to you about what mindfulness is, what is the history behind it, what are the benefits of it, how is it taught, and then a little on what are the current challenges and opportunities in the field. So, mindfulness, what is it? Mindfulness can be both a practice and a disposition or a way of life. At the Greater Good Science Center, we like to emphasize Shapiro and Carlson's definition of mindfulness: the awareness that arises out of intentionally paying attention in an open, kind, and discerning way. We value the focus on openness and kindness here, and on a personal note, I know this particular aspect of mindfulness, the kindness, the openness, is what I benefit from most in my practice because I struggle with self-criticism, and maybe some of you can relate. But when you bring awareness to your experience, you can become more attuned to both the external world, to sounds, to sights, to other sensory input around you, as well as your internal world, what you think, what you feel, and what you experience throughout a given day. And when we aren't at all aware of our inner world, that inner world can dictate how we feel and interact and respond without us having much of a choice in the matter. So when we experience stress, we may not even be aware of it. Yet when we begin to notice and observe our own stress, we may actually be able to navigate that stress a bit better. Mindfulness practice gives us permission to stop and to pause. And if we're constantly doing, running around and around in our little hamster wheels, then we can lose connection with who we are as human beings. During my years as a teacher educator, I started each of my classes with a few moments of mindfulness, and some of my students would express a lot of worry about their ability to be mindful. They would say, Amy, I can't do this. My mind wanders too much. I can't stop thinking. And I would say to them, well, that's exactly the point. It's not about controlling your thoughts. It's about observing them and witnessing them and noticing them. And most of all, being open and kind with yourself in that process. In the handbook of mindfulness and education, there's a wonderful user-friendly chapter by Shinzen Young, an American who was ordained as a monk in Japan back in 1970. So he has some experience under his belt with mindfulness. He walks you through the experience of mindfulness with a number of examples, and he helps you to understand key elements of mindfulness, describing it as attention that is present-centered and non-judgmental. Present-centered and non-judgmental. Pretty simple definition. And then he explains that we use a particular what he calls attentional skill set while we're being present-centered and non-judgmental. So first, we learn equanimity. And that's the ability to allow experience to come and go, sensory experience, thoughts and feelings without suppressing that experience or avoiding it. We also can learn through equanimity not to over-identify with an experience or make it too personal. So, okay, I'm angry right now. I feel it in my body here and here, and I'm going to watch it move through me. I'm not going to be swept up in it. Second is concentration, the ability to focus on what you consider to be relevant at a given time. You may focus your attention, for example, on the sound of a singing bowl or a chime, or you may place your attention on the movement of your belly as you breathe and keep it there. So concentration. Finally, sensory clarity. Young talks about the ability to keep track of what you're actually experiencing in the moment. So that could be sounds coming and sounds going. It could be patterns of breath. that you're discerning the beginnings and ends of sounds and sensations. Let's think a little bit more, though, about what seems to be happening while you're engaging in mindfulness practice. There are also two primary forms of attention that you draw on, according to the research: focused attention and open awareness. Arthur Zion shares this diagram with his students and his colleagues, and I think it's a really helpful visual for differentiating between these two skills. When you focus your attention, you concentrate on a specific target, like the sound of a singing bowl or the movement of the air through your nostrils as you breathe. But during open awareness, it's also called open monitoring by researchers, your mind becomes a receptive space. You're receiving, you're noticing things as they arise, as they come and go. And you might experience open awareness during a sitting meditation when you feel a body sensation pass through you, or when you hear a loud car drive by your classroom. You are openly witnessing what appears, whether internally or externally. Some of the most commonly used mindfulness practices are going to be listed here on this slide, and we're going to run through them briefly in case you're not yet familiar. The first is a body scan, and that's where you typically lie down on your back and deliberately move your attention through your body, concentrating on specific body parts and relaxing them. You can shift your attention from your head to your neck, to your shoulders, and down your body, one body part at a time, all the way to your toes, or you could do the reverse from toes to head. Because you have a specific target of focus as you mentally scan your body, the primary cognitive mechanism is focused attention. Now, in breathing meditation, typically you follow your breathing patterns as they occur naturally, perhaps at times paying attention to a particular place in your body, like your belly as it moves when you breathe, or your chest. However, you're primarily being with your breath and watching it come and go, inhaling and exhaling. So the primary cognitive mechanism here is open awareness. With loving kindness meditation, you have a very different focus of attention. In this case, you aren't concentrating on an object, like a sound or a body part. You're focusing on mentally sending good wishes to a specific person. It could be a loved one. It could be a neutral person in your life, like your bus driver or your mail carrier, or it could be someone who challenges you, like a family member or a colleague. Your orientation here is relational, and it's a bit different from the others. Depending on the guided meditation script you use for this practice, you would be sending thoughts to the person you've chosen, saying in your mind, may you be safe, may you be healthy, may you live with ease and happiness. Loving kindness meditation can also focus on sending good thoughts to yourself, a way of exercising self-compassion. And we'll talk more about self-compassion in the Summer Institute. So finally, witnessing thoughts and emotions. What about this last form of meditation? If you're sitting and observing your thoughts as they pass through your mind and you're watching them come and go, what is the primary cognitive mechanism here? Is it focused attention or open awareness? Hopefully open awareness is coming to your mind. It doesn't mean that you don't pause and you don't fixate on a thought like, when am I going to finish my grading, or why am I so sleepy today as I sit here? But the idea is to let that thought pass and open up again to other thoughts and feelings as they come and go. So when we think more broadly about the mindfulness movement, we think it's important to acknowledge the historical influences of wisdom traditions from across the globe. East Asian practices, and particularly practices from the Buddhist tradition, have been adopted in many parts of the world, especially in Western industrialized countries. Adopted and adapted. There's also, we also have a list of resources for exploring a range of philosophies and practices that have informed the mindfulness movement. And I am going to show you those right now. So Greco-Roman and Western philosophy, Jewish and Christian mysticism, Islam and specifically Sufism, Aboriginal traditions, and then American Transcendentalism. So resources for you in case you would like to explore further. But the secularized mindfulness movement in the West, a little bit on that, it really gained influence as the scientific study of Jon Kabat-Zinn's work evolves. And he drew from Buddhist meditation to develop the quite famous mindfulness-based stress reduction program. That was back in 1979, and his 8-week MBSR program featured various forms of mindfulness practice: walking meditation, body scans, gentle yoga. And some related programs, actually many more than are listed here, have been developed since then. So since the early 80s, the MBSR model has been adapted for a range of populations too. Therapy patients for sure, people suffering from addiction, soldiers, NFL players, working professionals, and of course, teachers and students. In terms of the secularized mindfulness model, though, it's primarily presented through a white lens. So if you'd like to think more deeply about the application of mindfulness in diverse settings, take a look at the work of these three experts. First, we have Rhonda McGee, who draws on research to demonstrate that mindfulness can play a role in reducing racial bias. We have an article of hers on the Greater Good site as well, if you're interested. She shares a set of mindfulness-based, what she calls color insight practices for increasing our awareness of how race impacts all of us. And if you click on her name on this slide, you can ultimately access an article that includes quite a range of practices. I think it's a real resource, particularly for university folks and college level. Second, Vicki and I recently had the privilege of hearing Dr. Michael Yellowbird at the Mindfulness and Education Conference in Washington, D.C. He studies mindfulness, trauma, and healing among Indigenous people in North America. And he explores the ways that mindfulness can facilitate what he calls neuro-decolonization, a method for drawing on traditional ceremonies, Indigenous ceremonies, to train the mind and change the brain's capacity to heal from the trauma of colonialism. Powerful speaker. You can access one of his talks by clicking on his name as well. And then finally, Dr. Camila Majid. She has a recent webinar that we've hyperlinked to her name. And this webinar features a discussion of mindfulness and how it can help us to develop what she calls discomfort resilience. She explains that we are immersed in a society focused on avoiding discomfort, and we tend to avoid, of course, conversations about race. Discomfort resilience is then our capacity to experience those uncomfortable feelings with actual interest in the growth to be gleaned from the pain. So, for example, in one of her webinar activities, she simply asks you to consider a time when you explored or discussed something that made you really uncomfortable, and to think about how that discussion or exploration actually made you grow. So how we can take what is uncomfortable and learn from it and grow from it. At this point, if we take a wider look at mindfulness research out there, we see a bar graph tracking the number of peer-reviewed studies published between 1980, when Kabat-Zinn's work emerged, and 2016. And here you get a sense of the dramatic growth in the research over the last 2 decades in particular. You may want to consider signing up and following AMRA, the American Mindfulness Research Association referenced here, so you can keep up with all of the latest studies. But just to give you a sense of the studies, particularly with adults, here are some of the variables that seem to be influenced by mindfulness training. And the most commonly cited studies address increases in attention and reductions in anxiety and depression. We're also starting to see more researchers exploring the links between mindfulness and pro-social behavior, kind and helpful behavior, and that's an interesting line of research as well. Other research helps us to explore what's happening in our brains when we practice mindfulness. Although this isn't a webinar on neuroscience, we want to highlight 3 areas of the brain that appear to be influenced by mindfulness practice or practices. First is the amygdala. The amygdala is aroused when you detect and react to emotions, especially difficult or strong emotions like fear. This part of the brain is actually less activated and has less gray matter density following mindfulness training. So it appears that it doesn't have to work as hard or as long after experiencing sustained training in mindfulness. Second, we have the hippocampus, which is critical to learning and memory, and it actually helps to regulate the amygdala. So this part of the brain is more active and has more gray matter density following mindfulness training. And then finally, the good old prefrontal cortex, or the CEO of the brain, the chief executive officer, is associated with planning behaviors, emotion regulation, and wise decision making. And the prefrontal cortex of the brain is more activated after mindfulness training. So in light of the research, we do have evidence that mindfulness can help us to become more resilient and adaptive to stress. Vicki mentioned in her last webinar, The Emotional Life of Your Brain by Richie Davidson and Sharon Begley. It's a great read if you want to dig further into this emotional, the role of mindfulness on emotions and resilience. Of course, we may have a better understanding of neuroscience than we did a few decades ago, but brain research doesn't tell us everything about human consciousness and the inner workings of the mind, our moment-to-moment experience. As you think about research in this area, know that there is an emerging field of study called developmental contemplative science. Researchers in this field are studying how mental training in particular can transform our minds and bodies across our lifespan. And they make a few assumptions based on research. First, of course, that the brain is inherently adaptive and plastic, and training can change the brain over time. And second, there are windows of opportunity across the lifespan for shifting and reinforcing neural pathways. And those particular periods are early childhood, especially, and certainly early to later adolescence. If you want to read more about mindfulness research relative to a particular age group, here are the absolute latest research reviews I've found. And if you click on any of the citations on this slide, you will be able to access the papers you're most interested in reading. So for anyone who's particularly interested in young children, early childhood, that area of focus, there is a review that just came out fairly recently of 12 studies, and there's some promising outcomes for young children relative to attention, self-regulation, and motor skills. But I do want to highlight that most of the studies, or many of the studies in this particular meta-analysis, incorporate yoga as well as mindfulness. The 2014 meta-analysis of K-12 students focuses on 2 particular variables. When they looked across 24 studies, researchers found increases in cognitive performance and resilience to stress in particular. Not a lot on behavioral change or emotion, but more on cognitive performance in terms of attention and then stress resilience. Quite a number of studies in this recent meta-analysis of college students, and the focus was purely on anxiety and stress, and fairly promising results indicating reductions in both anxiety and stress for college students relative to mindfulness training. And then finally, a recent review of 19 studies with educators suggests that mindfulness interventions may have a positive effect on teachers' well-being, on their physical health, and on their job performance. And I believe that included self-efficacy, sense of self-efficacy in the classroom, and classroom management strategies were also measured relative to job performance. But please keep in mind that the authors of each of these meta-analyses acknowledge that there's a real lack of consistency across studies and in terms of research methods and instructional practices and interventions. So that's a big caveat, along with the fact that they each mentioned that we really need to have more randomized controls trials in terms of studying the effects of mindfulness. But they note that research with each of these groups is preliminary and promising. If you're interested in a few programs that have been developed for different age groups, again, we're kind of targeting these different levels for you. Mindful Schools and Still Quiet Place, specifically for K-12, Mind Up Inner Kids and Mindful Life projects are all focused on elementary. Inner Kids also particularly focuses on families. Mindful Life looks particularly at elementary schools in the Bay Area and specifically Title I schools they're working with. And then for adolescents, Learning to Breathe and Stress Teens are particularly strong programs. I've worked with Learning to Breathe myself and can share more with you at SAE about that if you're interested. And then finally, higher ed. There are several resources for you relative to programs and webinars for higher ed. I am only showing you this slide and not talking you through it. Use it as a resource. We have a number of articles highlighted here if you want to explore in more depth the educational benefits of mindfulness. And now we move to toward the end of our time to talk about challenges and opportunities in the field. So some key challenges. First of all, where does mindfulness fit within a standards-driven industrial school model? What are we using it for? Are we using it for compliance in the classroom management? Will mindfulness eventually become hijacked by more industrial models? If this is the case, then we're probably moving far, far away from thinking about mindfulness as a disposition or a way of being. Second, who's teaching mindfulness? How and who benefits? As represented in this Time magazine cover, Secularized Mindfulness is primarily translated through a white lens. Who teaches whom in this case, and who are the primary mindfulness study participants? Who benefits most from mindfulness programs, and most importantly, who has access to those programs? There are definitely equity issues here to explore and examine critically. Is mindfulness too religious? I tell you, I'm on a number of listservs and this pops up all the time. There are plenty of parent community concerns expressed along these lines, and researchers like Tish Jennings write about how important it is to articulate clear secular guidelines that can help you to avoid some of the challenges when you're proposing practices and programs in public schools. But on the other side of the coin, if we're not being too religious, maybe we're being too scientific. What do we lose when we secularize mindfulness, when mindfulness is overcome with science and it becomes sort of whitewashed? And what do we lose when we don't embrace or at least acknowledge the influence of wisdom traditions from across the globe? And what if we saw mindfulness more as a habit of mind or disposition rather than as a specific brain-based skill? Is mindfulness being commodified? Is it becoming a shallow Band-Aid method for addressing stress at school or in the workplace? Some in the field refer to it as McMindfulness. Is it becoming a pop culture trend so that people are now beginning to roll their eyes when they simply hear the word mindfulness? And finally, is mindfulness too therapeutic? What about rationality and logic? All this focus on self-esteem and emotional intelligence and mindfulness leans toward therapy in schools, doesn't it? Teachers aren't therapists, claim some critics. So there are a few things to grapple with here as we think about mindfulness, but there are also a number of opportunities. We'll just share three briefly. First, using contemplative practices in academic learning. During the Summer Institute, we'll spend more time exploring how teachers and professors can draw on mindfulness-based practices to enhance reading and writing and other subject-specific learning experiences. And second, want to continue to highlight how mindfulness relates to equity and social justice. And this is where we're moving in the field more consciously. It's important to remind you of Rhonda McGee's work. We'll talk about that again in the Summer Institute and her color insight practices. And I just want to mention a few other individuals who are contributing in this area if you're interested. Michelle Chapman is exploring a definition of Black mindfulness. And Angela Rose Black has an organization called Mindfulness for the People that focuses on bringing compassionate mind-body wisdom to the field of racial justice. So she's another person to look out for. And finally, there's a great opportunity, of course, to capitalize on and think about how the fields of mindfulness, social emotional learning, and character education complement each other and inform each other. And Vicki will share a bit more about this in the final webinar in our series. So, there are real concerns that we need to keep in mind as we study and apply mindfulness in educational settings, but there are lots of wonderful, rich opportunities to infuse our classrooms with more mindfulness-based contemplative practices. And there's just so much power in making mindfulness practice a part of your life. I wouldn't be here if there weren't, and I doubt you would either. Mindfulness is a way of befriending ourselves in our experience. And I also like this quote: sometimes the most important thing in the whole day is the rest we take between two deep breaths. We can't say goodbye without encouraging you to take that rest and experience a few minutes of mindfulness. There are a number of different websites that offer free guided practices, and our Greater Good in Action site is one. The mindful breathing practice on our site is from UCLA's Mindful Awareness Research Center. So if you just click on this icon, the sound icon at the bottom left of your screen, just take a few minutes, just take 5 minutes to experience a mindfulness practice to close this webinar. Thank you very much for listening, and so looking forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.